Okay, what I wanted to do today is sort of finish up on some sort of odd aspects of sort of historical patterns that you find in Latin America. I mentioned last time that you have this area that basically is Spanish assimilated. I should point out that, of course, Brazil is Portuguese, so that government is actually from Portugal, but the attitude and the value system is very, very much the same. Same idea of landowners, relationship back with Portugal or Europe more specifically, and this idea of again, the idea of being tied to a European background makes you different than the folks that can't claim that. So again, you have to remember that when you're, if there's something that says you can basically say south of the Mexican border, that would be it. Would be the fact that people have a very different perception of socioeconomic class systems. It's based on an entirely different set of criteria, which I think Americans just don't tend to understand at all. And to be honest, I think most of them don't care. But it makes for a very different type of messaging that you see. Now, one of the odd side effects of this, and if you think about it for a second, let's do that one here. Oops. If you're in this part of the world, and anyone who's an elite in this part of the world defines that, not by virtue of where they are, not if they're in Peru or Chile or Argentina. Argentina is probably the classic cases, or Mexico, but it's instead with this part of the world. What that means is, I think I mentioned last time, is if I'm someone who's very wealthy and living in Chile, for example, I'll send my kids, if I've got the money and the power, I'll send my kids to finishing schools in Europe. I'm not going to see, very much second best would be whatever the top schools are in Chile. And of course, what those top schools in Chile are going to look like is they're not going to look like schools you'd find here. They're going to try to look like schools you'd find here. So you'd have to think of this be like if the United States had a relationship with England, where all the top high schools and grade schools in the United States, if they're really good schools, looked exactly like their English counterparts. And that would be the basis of even public education. So the idea that you basically mimic, if you would, these folks, and anyone who's successful would go to the UK to get education, to go to England. So you get your university degrees in England. And anyone who came back from England with a university degree would be 10 times more valuable than anyone who got an even better degree in the United States. That's what you see in Latin America. So even though they've been around part of the colonial system since basically 1600, all the focus of everyone who's anyone is here. Now, what that also means is all the focus of everyone here who isn't anyone is that if they really became anyone, is they would go here. So one of the dreams is if I'm successful, if I make money, I can send my kids to finishing schools in Switzerland or Spain or France or something like that. The clothing that I want, the things that I drink, the things that I eat, the things that I have in my home. I'm not interested in what someone makes in Colombia or Peru. I'm interested in what they make here in Europe. And if I'm a successful furniture maker in Peru, what do? I copy the latest European stuff. I'm not going to see anyone in this area as having any creds or interest that's relevant to me. So what you find here is everyone's focus is entirely non-local. The only folks that consume local stuff are the folks that are too poor or have too little power to consume anything else. And this becomes the driving force that you see in this particular region, is the fact that you've got this entire locus of interest in here. Now, not surprisingly, one of the side effects you get is depending on which group's in charge and when they're in charge. Switch back here. Then you get the logic, well, we'll say that it's the 1860s, 1870s, and all of a sudden Austria is having a hard time of it, or Spain's having a hard time of it. If you're over here in the Americas, what you do is you then try to recruit the folks from those areas when they're having troubles in Europe. And you try to get them to move to your country, because the attitude you have is the more Germans, the more Austrians, the more Spanish, the more whatever you have, the better off your country will be, because they're real Europeans. They're not European wannabes. They're authentic or genuine, or I don't know, whatever words you want to use. So this is where you get this really weird situation. The only way you might sort of be vaguely familiar with it when happens at the end of World War II, when basically you find that a huge number of the folks who are, in the political structure that was the National Socialist Party in Germany, the Nazis, managed to get their butts in gear and move to Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina, Uruguay, this region here. Now they're actually recruited by these populations. Hey, if you come here, we'll give you a place to crash. And the Germans had been were big in being recruited to these areas. A guy I met once was actually saying that when he was doing work in central Bolivia, you could actually go into some villages in the highland region, and the entire village would be German-speaking folks. The village would look like it was in Germany. Everyone would be European. They'd all be speaking German, and they had been there for maybe 100-something years, but they were living in Bolivia of all places. So the idea that you can have not so much expats, but you try to bring in Europeans because they'll sort of raise the quality, I don't know what you want to call it, of the region up. And of course, this became a huge issue because now when you're looking for leftover Nazis or someone involved in that whole mess in World War II, you go look for them in South America. You don't go look for them in Germany. And that's because they were actively recruited, but that's just the latest group. Now in the 19th century, what you also find large numbers of Japanese. I'm recruited from, again, same as here, from Hiroshima Prefecture largely, and originally brought as laboring forces, but also brought in this area because the attitude was very quickly that if they were Japanese, they were by definition better than the Indios. So no matter what new groups come in, it's not like the United States where new groups of migrants are the bottom of the feeding chain. In Latin America, as long as you're not Indian, you'll always never be bottom of the feeding chain. The Indians will always be the bottom of the feeding chain. So you're always one step up. So you find the recent, president of Peru, who I believe was finally imprisoned, Japanese. You find a lot of political players in this part of the world being Japanese. Huge numbers of them, if they're going to be anyone successful. Maybe not so much in politics, but certainly in terms of money, people make money, large companies, will all have European last names, oftentimes German or Austrian. If you ever go see, was it Evita? With the Pearls, it's a classic case in point. It's a musical, or I think it was a stage production, I don't know, whatever. That again is this whole, that's Argentina, but again, it's this idea of the superiority of this part of the world over this part of the world. So what you get is sort of an inferiority complex from anything that comes from this part of the world, where you only do stuff that's actually from here if you can't get the real stuff, which is Europe. And this makes it a very different type of synergy that you see, for example, with, say, the United States or even Canada, which was a colony, of course, of England until something 100-something years ago. But nonetheless, the Canadians don't have that same weird attitude towards the natural superiority of the UK that you find in most of Latin America with the natural superiority of Europe. On the Caribbean, a little less so, but then that's because the Caribbean was basically sort of like an agricultural market system. But in the rest of basically what's called Latin America, this is very much the way things were, and pretty much sad to say in many ways, it's still the way things are today. So one of the side effects is going to be if the Europeans say something, it's automatically good. If the Europeans tell you to do something, it's automatically good. If you're a successful country in Latin America, what you do is you try to increase your European ties. Now, this has taken a little bit of a hit because, of course, the huge new players in this part of the world, as in the Pacific, are actually China. But then the Chinese come in, they're sort of seen as the Japanese were. At least they're not Indians. And they got tons of money, or at least they did till this year. So what you find is anyone coming into Latin America is by definition better than this group of the locals. They're automatically already placed in what you might call sort of the middle tier and oftentimes middle class just by virtue of not being these guys. And that makes life really complicated. Not to mention it makes the politics very complicated because this is your majority population in almost all Latin America. So the majority population is basically treated like crap. They're not seen as being smart. There's all these terrible stereotypes of these groups. The other folks come in, at least you're not da-da-da-da-da. So this builds up an enormous amount of frustration, which eventually leads to revolutions and all sorts of conflicts, which is one reason why Latin America tends to be very politically destabilized. It's because you basically have everyone hammering on these guys' butts, but they're the majority population, and sooner or later they just snap and they've had enough of it. You go through this political disturbance. When the dust settles, sadly enough, when you find these guys are back in charge again. Might be a different group of names, but it's the same political social elites. And Mexican history is sort of a classic example of that. You have revolutions, you have political change, and when the dust settles, it's a different set of families, but it's the same small package from here. It's still this European imaged, not really identified with self population that runs the system. Now, having said that, what you find then is, since we're a Catholic school, is the relationship with Catholicism is sort of interesting. Because not surprisingly, given the fact this is the Spanish world, Catholicism is just sort of the way it's done. In fact, I believe statistically there's more Catholics in South America than anywhere else, but you'd have to check somewhere. What you find in that situation is, not surprisingly, if you're part of this population on the bottom, you've got a real ambivalent view of Catholicism, because the Catholics are basically these guys, in the sense of the sponsors of the Catholic religion, the big cathedrals, the Catholic Church in terms of its hierarchy, harks back to Europe, because of course the Catholic Church is based in Italy. So if you're part of the majority population, you've got a very sort of equivocal relationship with the religion. It's not that you don't believe the religion, but the political branch of it is real complicated. And traditionally, until maybe 100 years ago, the Catholic Church was usually very heavily involved in politics in Latin America. And it was usually with the support of the elites, because the elites were the ones that sponsored the church. So what you have is your majority population really was not too sure, what the relationship was with this group. So what you find is this interesting merging of belief systems either already existed in the Americas, in other words, that predate Catholicism or predate the Spanish, and or religious systems brought over. And a good example would be Carnival, that you see in most of Latin America, which is actually a traditional belief practice of inversion, which then gets sort of rolled into Catholicism because the population isn't going to give it up. So you sort of rebrand, as they were. If you go into Brazil or areas further north, the imposition or the addition of very complex local belief systems, or ones that are brought, for example, in the case of Brazil and places like that, brought in by your slave populations that are shipped in the 16, 17, early 1800s. And the most famous might be Santeria, which is a very complex religious system in a lot of this area, which is basically a combination of religious systems from, I believe, Ghana and Nigeria. In other words, the populations that were brought over as slaves to this area, combined with indigenous Indian, Native American belief systems in here. And then all of a sudden what they do is they throw a mix of some Catholic belief systems on top of that. So you find a real complex set of different religions or different religious variations, oftentimes based partially in Catholicism, but sort of rebranded or redefined in such ways to make it more attractive to the majority Indios population. And also by virtue of practicing Santeria, which you're not practicing as what you might call baseline elite Catholic. So the Catholic Church has a very, very complex relationship in Latin America. In the last 50, 60, 70 years, this is sort of flipped, because what you find is a lot of the Catholic priests and nuns in this area have gotten involved in politics in terms of just the flip of the old system, where they're supporting your Indios population in claims for land and credibility and legitimacy against the elites, which is why there's a fair number of these places where being a Catholic priest is a good way to get popped off. There's been a large number of assassinations of Catholic religious workers in the Americas, most specifically, famously in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and places like that, but also, I believe, Colombia. I think it's Colombia that really shops this list in terms of Catholic priests being bumped off. So what you find is the Catholic Church has got a very complex relationship, but they're in this whole area of Latin America, they're hip deep in it. And this makes it very different than, again, when you get north of the Mexican border, where the relationship between religion or religions in the state is much more distance, I guess, for lack of a better term, which is also true in Canada. So this is probably one of the other big differences between south of this border and north of this border, is the relationship of Catholicism, other types of religion, in politics and in ideas of social class, economic identity, etc., which you don't see here. And that tends to make these areas very, very, very different and very complex, and in some ways pretty unstable, since oftentimes even the Catholic Church isn't exactly sure how it wants to handle some of this stuff. So with that, sort of a short and quick on this one.